wanted to just begin with a personal anecdote. I taught for 30 years in a school district here in Ontario, and I missed 3 days of school in those 30 years. I have a 13-year-old, and since kindergarten, he's missed 2 days of school. So we both had a commitment to the institution. I loved every minute and couldn't wait to get back to correct the mistakes I made the day before. He has kind of a neutral approach to school. He goes for, as someone said in the chat, for his friends and extracurricular, both of which are challenged in this time of lockdown. I would love for him to come home at the end of the day and say, you know what, I can't wait to get back tomorrow. And as Milton Chen from Edutopia once said, his dream is for kids to run into the schoolhouse at the beginning of the day as fast and as enthusiastically as they run out at the end. So with that, I will introduce Carl Rust. And Carl, if you're checking your dividends from Kindle, I'm the last person to have bought today, so you probably get 2 cents for that. So
yeah.
Turn it over to Carl Rust to introduce Heather.
Okay, when I was assistant principal and I was given time in a staff meeting to talk, I always set a timer. So I'm setting my timer. I have 5 minutes to talk. Heather MacTaggart. We don't need no education. We don't need no thoughts control. No dark sarcasm in the classroom. Teacher, leave them kids alone. Hey, teacher, leave them kids alone. So I was a teacher in conventional school for 30 years, teacher and administrator. And I worked really hard for all that time to try to make school a fun, warm, inviting, wonderful place for kids to be. But I was always fighting against the system. I was always swimming upstream. And I made a lot of mistakes. But from talking to some of my former students over the years, I had some effect. I did some things right. But the problem is the system is designed in such a way, it's kind of a loop and it's self-replicating. So it's really hard for the system to change. And I've been reading the chat here and reading Wayne's comments, and I agree with a lot of what he says. It's very, very frustrating to try to change the educational system because there's lots of reasons why it's hard to change. But one of them is that we're all trapped in the system, and it's hard for everybody to figure out, okay, in my classroom, I can get away with some things. Maybe as assistant principal, I was able to do some things kind of on the side, but when you come back to it, it's still the same system. It's based on top-down decision-making. It's based on adults know everything and kids don't know anything. I mean, probably not that extreme, but pretty close to that. We've got to have grades. We have to have tests. We have to group kids by age. And when you try to question why do we do that, well, it's just the way we do it. It's interesting that the Jim's comments about Peter Gray, because I had that in my little thing. I was going to talk about Peter Gray. Peter Gray, when I was searching and trying to find out what can I do to make things better for kids, and I read Peter Gray's book. A parent suggested I read it. I read it, and it was a light bulb that came on, but it resonated with things I already kind of knew deep down inside myself. But he put it in a way that it's like, yeah, of course, this is exactly right. But that's what light bulb that's turned on in my head that will never go off. When I met Heather MacTaggart at the Aero conference and I listened to her ideas, that was another light bulb that went off. And I was like, well, of course, exactly. And when you look at her bio on the conference website, it's like, wow, this woman has accomplished a tremendous amount. But when we discussed things initially, one of the things that we found was that we shared a frustration because she's been trying to change the system from inside. I was trying to change the system from inside, and we're frustrated because we couldn't get it done. And so when she told me her idea of unschooling school, I was like, this is brilliant. And so I guess what I would say, I mean, you can read all her accomplishments: educator, author, innovator, consensus builder. I think all those things are true. She's had a couple startups that she's done that have had major impact on people's lives, but she's still, the system itself doesn't change. So she's a brilliant, passionate, articulate warrior on behalf of younger people. She's tenacious and determined to change the way we run schools. And I believe she will not rest until all people everywhere have the opportunity to guide their own education process. She's a tigress. Conventional schools, beware. Heather MacTaggart.
You know, Carl, you're not supposed to make me cry right before I'm supposed to be speaking. You know, I was imagining myself saying, thank you, Carl, that's very nice, but that really doesn't cover it. Thank you so much. Okay, now I've got to collect myself and share my screen. And I need help making sure that all this technology works. You are sharing your screen. Am I sharing my screen? This is what I want to know.
Yes, you are.
Okay, excellent. Now let's put it into full mode. Is that going to do it? Oh, wrong way. No, I lost the button. Are you seeing the full thing or not?
We can see your full screen, so the whole window, not just the presentation.
Okay. There we go. And now we have to make sure that it will go to the next slide. Okay, good. So it's nice that we have all agreed to meet remotely. Carl mentioned that, you know, I've spent a lot of time trying to change the education system. This is very true. And I've tried many, many things. I spent 10 years running programs on First Nations reserves. 4 of those years actually living there, thinking that if we can demonstrate that alternatives work in that kind of community, then for sure everybody else will listen. And while we change people's lives, and while Marcia, who's on this call, is doing that work and changing people's lives, it's not changing systems. So this summer, I started, as Carl said, meeting with people after the Arrow conference, a group of people, and we came together around this idea that maybe what we need to do is unschool school. So this website, unschoolingschool.com, is what we have developed. And we think that maybe it's a slightly different way to look at things, which will help people to realize that they can make change wherever they are. So before I kind of go through, I'm going to go through a bit of a PowerPoint presentation, show a couple of videos. Grace is speaking with me, and she's going to speak on video, and then we'll both be available for questions. And I'm hoping that we'll be ready for at least 20 minutes of questions at the end. So I've known there was something wrong with school for a very, very long time. And my feeling was that it didn't fit people, that, you know, it's got wonderful resources and some caring teachers, as we've seen in the last few days, but that some of the structures just don't really seem to match up with a lot of people. And I was one of those people. My mother used to tell the story of how I was a brilliant kindergarten student. The teacher said to her, you know, she should really be going straight into grade 2 and skip grade 1 altogether. But the funny thing was that by the time I got to grade 2, they realized, nope, she's stupid, like really stupid. She will not read. She doesn't know her letters. She doesn't do what she's told. And I didn't really learn to read until grade 6. And in those days, that was a very big deal. And so that "you're stupid" persisted as my reputation, really, until university, where miraculously I seemed to get straight A's. And I believe that was because I felt in control, because I got to pick the courses that I wanted, and I was doing things that I cared about. And so that's kind of just a little bit of background understanding. And I also thought maybe, you know, things had changed, and school is better. And my first daughter came along and just magically learned to read like at 4 years old. I was never so surprised. And I thought, okay, maybe, you know, maybe it was just me. And then my second daughter came along, and that was not happening. So she had some of the same struggles that I did at school. And I realized that, yeah, they don't put a dunce cap on you anymore, but she knew darn well what the Learning Center was. And things really hadn't changed. So what do we believe at Unschooling School, this group of us? Now, I have to tell you, this group has over 200 years of experience in the education system. So 2 centuries, the group of us that started this. So first of all, we all believe in public education. It is the cornerstone of democracy, and it is so important. But we think that schools should be serving the kids, serving the society, and that students do have rights and responsibilities. And that's a big part of why we've all gathered in these for a few days. And that learning flourishes best in a democratic environment. And man, did we ever get that message today. Earl was unbelievable. Yakov, I should say, was unbelievable this morning. And then Derry followed it up with how you can do what he's doing, but just in one classroom. It was amazing. And then the example from the UK too just made it all come together. But we also think that it's a right for the family to choose how the kids learn. So what does that have to do with why we're all together, the child-friendly cities idea? Well, it has to do with this last statement here, that we believe, and we've all signed up for this, so we all must believe this, that kids need to have a voice and have their voice matter. And, you know, the other thing that matters is their time. Because if you look at it, time's really all we have. So how kids spend their time, they should have a whole lot of say in that. And we believe that. Clearly, we're all here together, and we're saying we believe this because we're saying let's honor children's rights. But do we really honor them? Or do we just like to congratulate ourselves that it's nice that we're gathering about this? I think it's more than that. And I think that we do know that kids have a voice. These are the words from the National Child Day video. If you go online, you can actually see quite a cute video. And you know, and obviously that there's a feeling that maybe they don't have a voice, because otherwise, why are they saying, you know, put your hand up for your rights? We need to have these rights. So if kids have a voice, that's good. But the other half is we need to listen. And we need to listen in school, because it is where kids spend most of their waking hours. And despite the proliferation of homeschooling and unschooling, which I think in many ways are terrific, most kids are in school. So what does having a voice mean? Well, one of the key things it means is having a right to choose. And we assume that everybody has the right to choose. Unless you're doing something illegal or immoral, you're allowed to go about your day doing the things that you want. But really, do we let kids do that authentically? Can they say no, thank you, as Carl says, to things that they're not interested in? Because you can't say you have choice, but you only have the choice to consent. You only have the choice to go along. So I'm going to read a letter that I received this week, an incredibly beautiful and well-written letter from a parent of a 15-year-old to her daughter's teacher. And she wrote this letter because she did not feel that her daughter's voice was being heard or honored, and that she felt it was important enough to sit down and write this letter. I'm just going to read 2 paragraphs. Clearly, the experience of living and going to school in a pandemic is difficult for all of us, children, teachers, and parents alike. Charlotte is no exception. She has expressed her frustrations about the many restrictions that are being placed on her and her peers in and outside of school, especially as they reach an age where independence and autonomy are important and necessary for their development. Her father and I are challenged to find ways to support this critical need for Charlotte. Most importantly, we seek to provide an open, non-judgmental, and non-punitive environment in which she can express her needs and her frustrations. What she is experiencing in school is not such an environment. She says that when the children express their frustrations, for example, equating school to a prison, because that's what it feels like to them, they are told this is inappropriate. Their experiences and feelings are not being acknowledged. Instead, some teachers have responded by telling them about how difficult it is for them, the teachers, to manage in an attempt to guilt them into compliance with the intensive COVID restrictions. Charlotte says, they make us feel bad. Obviously, it's difficult for teachers, but the children are not to be an outlet for this emotional manipulation, and it is not suitable. So what Charlotte hears is, it's okay for you to say how you're having a hard time, but it's not okay for us kids to say we are having a hard time, unless we say it in a way that makes adults comfortable. So I think we need to take this seriously. Like, this is this week. You know, this wasn't when I was a kid. This wasn't even when my kids who are in their 20s now were kids. This is right now. We need to take kids seriously. So to describe that really, really well, I'm going to play a video by Blake Bowles. This is a YouTube, and he's been mentioned earlier in this conference, and I think it deserves a listen. It's quite short. Now let's hope that the segue to this video works.
Imagine being in a romantic relationship where your partner forces you to do stuff you don't like and never ask your permission. That'd be terrible, right? Imagine living in a country where unelected leaders run the show, control your every movement, and trample your basic rights. That's called tyranny. Imagine going to a hospital where doctors just start operating on you or giving you medications that you didn't ask for, and if you don't like it, too bad. We all know that consent is the foundation of healthy relationships, that legitimate governments operate on the consent of the governed, and that in healthcare, to provide treatment without asking permission first is unethical. But what about in education? How often did your parents ask you if you want to go to school and took you seriously if you said that you didn't? How much choice did you actually have in your class schedule beyond a few electives? How much freedom did your teachers give you to complete assignments or meet objectives in a way that works for you? My guess is you had very little say in your education. You probably had to ask permission just to go to the bathroom. What if the government forced adults to go back to school for some supposedly noble purpose, like parent training, for example, and restricted their time, speech, and movement, forced them to stay in class, gave them mandatory homework? What if we did this to all adults in the name of citizenship or ongoing education? We wouldn't stand for it. There'd be a revolution. I'm glad I don't live in a country with re-education camps for adults, but I'm disheartened that we still treat young people as undeserving of consent and incapable of handling it. Yes, consent gets messy when we're talking about little kids, but adolescents and teenagers, they're capable of understanding their options and making informed decisions. They've been making big decisions and taking on real responsibilities since the dawn of humanity. It's only very recently that we've restricted their scope of action through the institution we call school. So what might consensual education look like? How about this? Make all high school classes optional. Give teenagers real control over their studies. Turn high schools into giant resource centers that feel more like libraries instead of prisons. Let students vote with their feet. If no one shows up for a class, then cancel the class. This would solve so many so-called discipline issues in a heartbeat. We can make high school more like college. Tell students that in order to graduate, they need to have a certain number of units and a certain number of subjects, but let them figure out how. If they feel like a certain class is really boring or unengaging, let them skip the lectures as long as they can perform on the final exam. And in fact, let them test out of anything as soon as they're ready, including high school itself. You don't have to wait for this utopian future to arrive. Right now in North America, and increasingly across the world, there are learning centers and alternative schools organized around the principle of consent. In some of these places, the students even have the power to hire and fire their teachers. You can also opt out of the school system entirely by becoming a homeschooler. Homeschooling is legal across the United States and increasingly across the world, and it's the cheapest and fastest way to take back control over your or your child's education. Consent isn't a radical idea. When we give people real choices, including the choice to say no, they feel respected and they act more responsibly. Essentially, let's treat young people more like adults, since after all, that's who we're trying to help them become. To fix education, make it consensual.
So good. I feel like I just can end what I'm saying right now because Blake just said it all. So Blake says a lot of great things, and one of them at the end, and this is what Jim was talking about, is that, you know, kids need the consent to leave school if that's what they want, and I agree. But I think we also need to really focus on kids staying in school, because not everybody has the luxury or the privilege to be able to leave school. Lots of people need to go to school because their parents need them to be somewhere, and there's lots of great stuff at school. So why don't we just change some things so that it can be enjoyable and workable for everybody? So let's talk about what, you know, consent in school would look like. That's what it looks like right there. Does that guy look like he's in control of his life? Absolutely. So this is a concept that we are sort of promoting and putting out there on the unschooling.com website, unschoolingschool.com. And that is the concept that kids should be able to choose to be a free learner. And actually, I think Jim mentioned this at the end of his talk. He said, why can't they be free learners? Well, they should be able to be free learners, and they should be able to be free learners in school. And that's someone who takes responsibility for their own education, who uses the things that are already available in schools, the great resources, the gym, the art room, and the loving teachers that are there, but in a way that works for them. And that importantly, they have consent. They have the ability to opt out of things that they're not interested in and to choose others that they are. And this isn't just about students' rights and about human rights, because really, you know, as Sue said in our kickoff yesterday morning, you know, human rights need to be kids' rights because kids are humans. It's also about mental health, because we know there are a lot of young people that are struggling. Mental health, and we've heard this over the conference, mental health is a big, big issue for many kids, for way too many kids. But there is a sort of a secret thing that we don't seem to be saying, which is connected to mental health, and that is autonomy. That we know, you know, kids obviously spend more time when they're in school, when they're out of school, and in the summer break, happiness goes up, autonomy goes up, and anxiety and depression and suicide go down. So people that feel they're in control of their own life, we sometimes refer this in psychological terms to internal locus of control. The things that I do are going to affect me, as opposed to I'm a pawn and I'm just at the whims of others. So if we know that giving kids autonomy, and we say, you know, what do we want? Well, I think one of the things we want, and probably the most important thing we want, is we want kids to be happy. So if we want them to be happy, let's give them autonomy. I think we also want them to love learning. So let's let them follow what they're interested in. And we all know we want them to be lifelong learners, this term that is used so often. But to become a lifelong learner, you need to be able to choose what you're going to learn. And for sure, everybody loves this idea of, oh, it would be so great if kids took full responsibility for becoming educated. Well, let's give them the responsibility. You can't learn to handle responsibility unless you have some. And why not? Why not let kids take responsibility for their education? It's what human beings have been doing for most of our existence. It's what all our common ancestors did. And whether if you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, everybody's common ancestors were hunter-gatherers. And hunter-gatherers children learned through free play. There was no formal classrooms. Kids figured it out because we are born to do that. We are literally born to learn. So the other key piece of this is, who are we as adults to figure it out and to say, this is what you need to learn, this is what's important, and follow this curriculum and everything in your life will be fine. Because we don't know what the future looks like. Who among us predicted the pandemic? You know, in the news today, Toronto, where I am right now, is going again into full lockdown starting on Monday. So clearly we do not have a crystal ball that predicts the future. But kids do have an inborn biology that has them look around and say, what do I need to figure life out? And how do I do that? So I think we need to honor that. We need to honor it. And we need, as adults and as school systems, to be there to serve kids like a service, like a public service. School as a public service, serving the needs of kids and of society. And I think that what that can look like is being a free learner. So I'm now going to let Grace, on a video, tell us what being a free learner looked like to her, because Grace is a live free learner. and she's going to be with me for the questions and answers afterwards.
Hi. Thanks so much for coming to this conference and for attending and listening to what I have to say and what all of my fellow speakers have to say. It's really, I feel honored that you have taken this time out of your day and out of your busy lives to attend this conference and to really tune in and not only hear, but hopefully act on some of the things that we all have to say today. So how I started and kind of what brings me here is I just graduated high school. I got my Ontario Secondary School diploma, and you may think that I went through high school like most teens would, but I did it a bit differently. So I went to school and I did it kind of a hybrid, flexible model that luckily, I feel so lucky that my school allowed me to come a few days a week, come for only a few classes, and really make school fit my life and really fit what I thought my learning path is and would be, instead of me having to kind of fit their model of school that was already in place. And I'm asking myself the question is, why am I what makes me lucky, and why can't other students and every student have the opportunity to really have school be something that, one, they enjoy, and two, they can actually really learn from. It can really be a beneficial experience where we use the amazing mentors that are at the school and the amazing facilities so that we can really move forward in education in preparing students for the future that we're so unsure about. Because if people, I believe, are helping and leading their own path, then they're going to get to a destination that's closer to where they want to be. So with my school, I want to thank them for cooperating and allowing me to do the flexible model. And I also want to send a challenge out to all the other schools for, if a student comes to you and wants to do school a bit differently, why don't we give them the opportunity and allow them to try? Because at the end of the day, if we're not given the opportunity to try our own thing, think about how many amazing products and services that we have today that wouldn't even be in existence. So my journey started in kindergarten when I first entered the educational realm. And before then, for sure, I was learning, but this is more traditional education starting in kindergarten. And I went through for a little while, and I kind of did it a bit differently at more of an alternative school, but still a public school. And then I decided, you want to know what? With the consultation with my parents, in grade 1, it wasn't really fitting me. So I went to homeschooling and unschooling. So I was homeschooled and unschooled, I would say, for life, but in actuality and for concrete dates, I was homeschooled from about grade 1 to grade 8, where I tried out school a bit more just to see if I liked it. And then after a few months in grade 8, I decided that unschooling was a better fit for me. And then grade 9, I decided I'm going to try public school again. So I went into my public school and I took off 1 day a week to still do some homeschooling courses, but I was there 4 days a week taking 4 courses and really working there. Really, I was attending every day and I was doing like any other student would. But after that semester, I thought to myself, I'm really not having time to do all the volunteer things and all the extracurriculars that I'm kind of used to and all the community engagement and involvement. And I really wasn't feeling that school was the perfect fit for me based on how much time I felt was spent on things that didn't really matter to me and the direction I was going. So I decided I'm just going to go back to homeschooling. I'm going to do a few courses online, and then maybe in the future I'll try out school again, but for now, I'm done. And my school brought me in with administrators and the school social worker, and I have to thank them all so much for this. They said, how can we make school work for you? What do you want, and how can we make our facilities and our system fit you better? And that single question opened so many doors. It really kind of unleashed the dam and the waterfall of what all could happen for me in my education journey, because I knew that usually the school is not involved. In the past, some schools, they don't feel comfortable sharing the resources that they have, or for other financing reasons they're not able to. But my school, which was a public school and which still is a public school, allowed me to do it more flexibly. So they allowed me to go there a few days a week, enough to stay enrolled in the courses and stay engaged, and I worked out with my teachers, which I thought gave me so much more responsibility and more ownership over my learning, because I controlled what days I was going to be there. So when I was there, I was fully engaged, and the days that I wasn't there and I was working remotely, I was working from home, or I was working on other courses, I was able to manage my time so I could still stay on track, but still live my life outside of school. And I think that this is an opportunity that I feel so lucky and so kind of blessed to have been able to have throughout my schooling experience in the last 4 years. And I feel like more students can benefit from the support that we can give them. Because though my school allowed me to do this and my parents were on board, there are a lot of other factors they're really hard to deal with when you're new to alternative education and when you're trying to still be in the school system but still have your own little thing going on. So I think that it's so important that we have organizations and individuals that can help and support our students, and that we have schools be open and able to help our students. Because at the end of the day, if the school is trying to get the children to fit into the school's mold, it's not going to work as well as if you have a bunch of engaged, empowered, and imaginative students, and the school is helping them to solve the problems that we're going to have in the future. Because if we keep solving problems with the same thinking we have today, we're not going to get new solutions. But if we have brand new thinkers that we're able to empower, then they'll be able to, and hopefully I'll be on board with in one of these amazing ideas, I'll be able to help with my kind of unique perspective and help us lift ourselves and our whole society out of some of the crazy issues that we're facing, like extreme climate crisis and racism and Indigenous rights, and really helping people empower each other so we can be individuals and have a whole society that is built more around consenting and more around really driving and fueling our passions and really going for what we want to achieve. So I think that having this platform to share kind of a bit of my journey and to hear all the other amazing speakers, I think it's just, I want to say thank you so much to the organizers for putting this together and for allowing me my little chunk of time to share what I have to say. And I really hope that everyone listening, whoever's in your life, if they're people that are older adults, if they're children, if they're teenagers, you're able to empower them and yourself to take control of your life and take control of your learning. And it's not going to be easy. And I don't mean that to scare people off or to make it seem like, wow, it's going to be so hard. But I have to say it is worth it. Some days may feel hard, some days may feel easy, but definitely when you're blazing a new path, it takes more energy and time and motivation to keep yourself going. But I think that we all have that. And I think that sometimes you may need to just a process that in unschooling we call deschooling, and kind of let some of the pressures, external pressures, roll off of you and kind of get out of your system so that you can use your own motivation to really get you where you want to be. And not saying that you know where you want to be, or that every single child knows where they want to be, or every single senior or adult or teenager, but if you are acting from where, like, kind of what your next right move may be, then you're going to eventually make all those tiny steps in the direction you want to go, instead of taking larger steps in a direction that you don't even care about. So sometimes taking the smaller steps can get us exactly where we need and want to be. So I want to thank you guys so much for listening. I want to thank everybody for, again, taking the time out of their day, listening to me. If you have any questions, please reach out and contact me or ask me, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about my journey or about any of the other realms that I have some knowledge of. Thank you so much.
Okay, back to proper screen sharing mode. Let's see if we can do that. Grace, that was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather. It's always a weird kind of paradox watching yourself speak on screen. So
Yeah, well, you did very well. Okay, are we seeing now this slide?
yes, we are.
Okay, excellent. So, I come back to this as the final message, that it's so important that we take this day seriously, that it's not about this weekend, and it's not about these few days, and it's not about once a year we honor the rights of children, but how do we really live this? And I think I'd like to invite everybody, if they haven't been, to go to the unschoolingschool.com website and to look at the free learner tab and to read the whole thing. And then to ask yourself this question: should giving kids choice about what they do and what they don't do in school be a radical idea? Or should it just be a basic human right? Thank you. I will stop sharing screen so we can answer some questions.
Oh, I've solicited questions in the chat, and if people want to make a comment or a question, if you just preface that in the chat with question, uppercase question. We're going to go to Prajakata, who had a couple of questions, and so I'll turn it over to Prajakata to ask. I think she has one for Heather.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Prajakta, and my first question was for Grace, because Grace, you mentioned, great talk, by the way, loved listening to your story. My first question is to Grace about the alternative school system that you mentioned a couple of times that you went to when you were enrolled. So I know you were homeschooled from grade 1 to grade 8, but you also mentioned an alternative school. So I'm curious what that was.
Yeah, for sure. So I went to, it was still a public school. I'm in Ontario, Canada. So it was in a city called Hamilton, and it was one of 7 in Canada. I believe it was part of kind of this alliance for more self-directed education within public schools. So I found that to be really a really good fit for me, I guess, because I wanted something that was a bit more flexible. So they were flexible with my homeschooling schedule. And so it was an alternative school, but it still was a public school. So I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Yeah, it does. No, I was just curious. Good to know. Yeah. I lived in Mississauga for quite a while, so we were neighbors at some point.
Yes. Isn't that great?
Thanks for the answer.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for your question.
And you had another question for Heather?
Yes, I did. I was just wondering if anyone else had any questions for Grace. We'll
go to Carl first and then come back to you for your question.
Sure.
So Carl.
Okay, I have to remember it now. Let's see.
Read it too.
So, yeah, I really enjoyed your story, and I've seen things like that happen. I've been involved in some of those cases, but I guess the question is, the way it works out, it depends on the goodwill of the school. There you have a nice principal or you have a good guidance counselor. How do we change the culture so it's just, we don't have to ask permission to do that? It's just kind of like what Jim was saying in his conversation. How do we make it just the normal?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're right. Like the school administration is so much on how the school is run. And I think it also, the board definitely trickles down for sure into how the school is run. So I'm thinking that if we started, like, hopefully individuals within a school can kind of instill a little bit of wiggle room, and then it can kind of ripple out. But for it to become the norm, I think at like a school board level, because I think school boards have more power than kind of we realize, especially with COVID, when we're realizing that school boards can choose to do different things because it's so regional. So I'm thinking that having like the principals, and if your principal's on board, like a lot of great things can happen. And it's just getting those people to be interested and kind of willing to try a different style, because it is hard, right? Like teachers college, a lot of lovely people go into teachers college and then come out and are kind of different people, and the way they would manage kids and kind of the students that they have would be different than maybe they originally wanted to. So it's almost kind of the workshops for teachers, because that's what kind of empowered me in school, having a few of the teachers that were kind of radicals in that idea of kind of like closing the door and doing the right thing. So I think that's kind of where the change can start, with like individual people trying to get it to ripple out.
I think I'm going to follow up to that question and to Grace's answer and say that, we do know that there are what we call in our group responsible subversives. So people that work within education, that believe in public education, but really feel it needs to change. So, Grace was lucky that she ran up against some responsible subversives. So they were very cooperative, and those people are for sure out there. But I think if we expect there to be more of them, and if we actually in a way demand there to be more of them, then we need to raise our voice. We need to say, as parents and as kids, because the public education system is for the parents, is for the kids. It's really for the kids, but obviously kids have a lot of are within a family. So it comes down to being within families. And I think that if we get a cohesive voice that says, look, we need kids to be free learners. We need kids to be like Grace. We need them to be able to make choices and decisions and to consent. The Blake Bowles thing is consent. It's absurd that we have said since 1989 that kids are humans too. Well, and I don't know what they were before that, but anyway, in 1989, we decided they were humans. So human beings, not just human becomings, then they should have that right to consent. And I think we need to just say, look, our kids have right to consent, and that's how we're going to act.
Mm-hmm. Agreed, Heather. But I love that word, like they're not human becomings, they're human beings, right? Like they're not just empty vessels floating around looking to be filled up. And I think a lot of speakers this weekend have articulated that, and I think it's exciting to see such a wave of kind of empowerment to children coming.
Thinking of Angela James in the Northwest Territories, we had a chance to talk to her about her views on early childhood education. And in the Dene culture that she's attached to up there, children are seen as being born whole, not in need of anything, really, which I think is an amazing worldview. Yeah. Maybe we could go back down to Prajakta. I think you had a question for Heather.
Yes, sure. Heather, great to hear you talking. Loved your speech. My question, and I should clarify, this question probably comes from my ignorance, so pardon me for that. But I'm thinking, if we defer to students to decide what they want to study and what they didn't want to study at all, could we risk developing them into lopsided individuals? And are there any checks and balances on that? What would be your views?
It's a great question, Prajakta, and I think that it's a question that lots of people have, and it's a common argument against unschooling or against self-directed education. That how are kids going to know what they should learn? They're going to miss something. They're not going to be well-rounded. The first thing I would say is that the current education system, no way, shape, or form creates well-rounded people. That is a myth. I came out of school. I would say that I remembered 1% of what I was taught in K to 12. I had zero interest in history. I now love history. I love to go to other countries and go to museums and find out what's in the museum and the history and what happened in that country, because I'm a lot, very, very interested in it. Teach the way history was taught in school, even though I had a couple of really actually nice history teachers that I liked, killed my interest in history. School is full of repetition. I remember my son saying to me, Mom, we're learning civics again, the structures of the government. This is the fourth time. This is the fourth grade I've learned this. Because no one was paying attention the first time because they didn't care. So the idea that we teach and kids learn is inaccurate. People learn because they're interested and they are wanting to learn. They need that piece of knowledge for some reason. So, the first part is the myth. Just because we're teaching doesn't mean they're learning. The second part is kids will figure it out. That's what we're biologically designed to do. So are kids going to be completely well-rounded at the age of 18 if they're allowed to self-direct? No, probably not. Why should they be? A lot of our greatest people, our greatest thinkers are not well-rounded. because they really focus on an area that's of interest to them. And what is wrong with that? Do we really need Bill Gates to also be an Olympic athlete? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't think we need to worry about that. And if we're not sure, then just look at some of the research out of the Sudbury Valley School, 50 years. They followed up on every kid. They're doing really well. They figured it out.
Mm-hmm. And if I could quickly add there, Heather, I think that having kids immersed in the community is going to create more well-rounded individuals than having them in kind of this like kind of monoculture happening within the schools.
Yeah, so, really good point, Grace. And if, you know, the idea of unschooling schools, so taking schools and helping them to become more like community centers and resource centers and like learning centers. It's going to be probably a little while. We're going to need a lot of free learners in school before we can get to the point where there's big age mixing. But that is such a key component, you know, and that is one of the things that makes schools like Sudbury Valley and Agile Learning Centers work, is because kids naturally, and we all know this from our own kids, like a 5-year-old wants to be like an 8-year-old. They don't want to be like a 35-year-old. You know, they want to be somebody that's just above them. So when age mixing is there, then and grouping is there, like Grace was saying, you know, if kids are in a community, they may not go in with an interest in something, but they'll see somebody else's interest, and that might spark their attention, and they might go over there.
Sure. Time for two more, well, maybe three more questions. We're going to go to Heidi, Stephanie, and then Derry.
Okay, it took me a while to find the unmute button. Hi. This can be for both Grace and Heather, or either way. Okay, so my question, I'm thinking, Grace, hearing your background helped me to understand how come the school system might have been more receptive, because you were coming from the homeschooling first. And I was thinking, you know, maybe the school gets more funding if you're actually a student and not a homeschooler. But if you're starting out, and I was still wondering about the equity issue in regard to other people, like did you get a high school diploma from that school, or were you just called a homeschooler that got to use the high school resources? And how does that work to provide equity or fairness to everyone else if you actually publicize that? And also, just it seems like if you didn't have a place to go at home, it would seem like it would be awkward to me to say, okay, some people get to not do a certain class or something, and where do they go? It seems almost easier to create a whole additional school within a school where you actually have a place set aside so that people can do stuff instead of just being I'm here but not doing. I mean, you know, you got to go home, so that made it a little less awkward, I guess. So there's just several different questions in the how do you navigate the fairness issue, and how did your school specifically deal with how do we let Grace do this, and then do we tell all the other high schoolers that they have to jump through all of these hoops? So anyway, just some questions like that.
For sure. Yeah. So the other like when I didn't show up, like I would work out with the teachers how many days a week I'd show up, because certain classes you need to be there. Like, for example, a gym class is a lot of participation, right? But your English class, not as much participation. So all like the students would visually see Grace isn't here today, and they all knew kind of what I had worked out because I'm sitting beside them, we're talking every day or the days that I'm there. And so the school did offer what they offered to me to other people that I know that kind of went into that through homeschooling, or it already was, I chose the school because I knew they were more welcoming to homeschooling and unschooling. And I think the idea of equity and fairness within that is I would like to see it really encourage for everyone to take kind of control and have the opportunity to direct their education. But you are right that a lot of people don't have the support in their family, and then also don't really know what's out there. So there were so many students I know kind of in school that they kind of weren't really interested in doing anything differently because they were just so used to kind of like, I'm going to be in high school for a few more years and then I'll get out and do something different. And I'm trying to think, there's another question that you asked me in there that I don't think I've touched on yet.
Grace,
go ahead. Go ahead, Heather.
Is that okay? If you have something else added at the end. Heidi, that was a super complicated question, multifaceted, but very, very good, because one of the things you asked was the school more open because she was a homeschooler? And I think that, you know, Grace would say that, first of all, it was a little bit of an alternative school, but the idea that they were more accepting because she's a homeschooler, and this is really dollars returning back to the school if they take her in even part-time, is yes. So that's one of the things that we think right now. We're in a position with COVID and with the droves of people leaving school and becoming homeschoolers, that if homeschoolers put up their hand and say, you know what, we're going to stay registered and we're going to do these 2 courses. And when COVID's over, we're going to stay registered and we're going to come into school these days and do it like Grace, that it really gives us a fantastic opportunity to push for change. We know for sure that there is one school board in Ontario that has said publicly, the homeschoolers, come back, come register and just take what you need. So, you know, we're looking forward to that becoming more of the norm. And I think that if it did, it would answer your equity question, because you get enough homeschoolers or unschooling schoolers, then you do have to have a school within a school. And even if it's just one room, which is given over to kids that are unschooling school, then that creates its own little community. And then kids that don't have parents where somebody's at home and maybe parents that aren't even aware of all of this, they don't have somewhere to go. But if they can do that within their own school, which is public and for the good of all, then that creates that flexibility.
Can I, just in the interest of time, can I go up to Stephanie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add in quickly a situation that I'm aware of, where a teen was needing to leave school because she was having all kinds of mental health challenges. She and her parents requested that she be allowed to attend part-time, that some kind of accommodations be made to allow her to work through this while remaining in the school. The response was that that's not the way it works, like you're either here or you're not. And about a year later, she kept trying, it just wasn't working. And finally the school actually called a meeting with her and said, okay, what if you just come for half a credit? Could that work? Could that stop you from actually leaving school? And in this situation, the parent said, if you'd offered that a year ago, this kid would not have had to go through the mental health anguish that she's been through in the last year. And it was such an interesting situation because there was this collection of people from the school board. There were 5 different people in this conversation who came to what would have been the perfect solution at the beginning. And so again, as I've said in the chat, this idea of amplifying stories like Grace's, like Ella's, like my son, by getting these stories out there, does this enable people who are in positions of decision making to make the right decision or see the right decision for the individual child's well-being earlier on in the process? That was just a comment, not a question.
It was a rhetorical question and that was huge. So the final question, comment to Derry.
Yeah, again, it's a comment, but listening to Heather talk and to Carl talking about unschooling school makes me think, as well as thinking about responsible subversives, the people who run schools need to become sort of responsible subversive opportunists. And I was thinking about my time as vice principal of a school with a head who'd been ill for 2 years, so I was sort of acting principal, was to take every opportunity to dissolve the boundaries between the school and the community. A classic one and serendipity comes into this as being an opportunist. I was in a meeting and I heard that the local county council was going to close the town library because they hadn't got enough money. So I said, fantastic, let's bring all the library books from the town library into the school library and then we'll just have a community library. And that worked brilliantly because the most of the books in the town library have been actually chosen by people in the community. So they wanted to read them. So all the books that adults wanted to read moved into the school library and the school library just opened itself up to the people from the town. So we had people coming into the school all the time to borrow books, which was pretty amazing. And I had an interesting experience. The Students' Council said to me, we had a library committee on the Students' Council, and they said, there's not enough books in the library we want to read. And the boys particularly complained this was a quarrying community. And an awful lot of the parents were owner-drivers of trucks. And the boys said, there's no books on trucks. So we asked the person who ran the library, why are there no books on trucks? She said, because as soon as we buy one, it gets stolen. So I said, well, look, wouldn't it be a good idea to stop the stealing and carry on buying the books if they're the ones that people want to read? And it turned out the kids knew very well how the books were stolen. They were passed out of a window that they could open without going past the checkout. And so we said, okay, well, look, we'll screw up that window. So only the higher ones will be open. They won't be able to pass the books out. This was the kids' idea. They solved the problem. It stopped the theft of books, and all the books on trucks from the town library moved into the school library, and loads of kids started borrowing books again. You've just got to be an opportunist. You've got to see every opportunity to make these things happen. Another small point, I once had a bet with some older students. They were complaining about the town was a very boring place to live. So we said, how many organizations do you think they are in the town? Or they said about 20. And I said, no, there's at least 30. So we did a survey. We found 150 organizations in the town. Most of them didn't have proper resources for their meetings. So we said, great, we'll open up the school as long as the organizations allow the school students to be members with no subscriptions to pay. And again, it completely opened up the relationship between the community and the school. So, and the more you do that, the more you pull the walls down, the more possible the whole notion of a school within a school, an unschooling school, becomes, I think. So I would really like to get at head teachers if I could and say, come on, you've got to do your best to pull these walls down between the school and the community. And unfortunately in England, things have gone the other way. Because of security, we've now got barbed wire fences around schools, which seems to me completely tragic. Even in a rural school like mine, they're obsessed with security. You have to pass CCTV cameras to get in through the school entrance, etc., etc. It's really very sad. And I'm not sure that it's actually necessary.
You remind me of Isaac Asimov in conversation with Bill Moyer back in 1988. And he said, you know, schools and prisons are alike in that the goal is to get out of them, right? So there you go. Fences outstanding, barbed wire. Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Grace. And thank you, Carl, for your work on this session. We are going to, as always, so much more to talk about. Let's take a 5-minute break. We'll be back at 2:33 for our next session.
But I was just going to say, Stephen, that Derry, we need to get every educator Yakov's talk from this morning. Like that was just.
Yeah.
I agree, Heather.
You know,
I agree.
Yeah, how could you listen to that and not realize that the boundaries between the school and the community need to disappear? And just, I mean, there was just so much in it. But to your point of, community schools, the schools as a community good. School in the community in the school. So important.
Could I add something to what you said, Heather?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for the session. It was really nice. But no, adding to that, I think that many of, or if not everything that it's been said this weekend and in many other conferences should be given to educators, because myself, I'm a classroom teacher student. I'm finishing my master now. And I have never heard any of these type of things in my 5 years of training, right? So if we want to make an impact as well in future teachers, I think that could be something that, so yeah, totally agree with that.
How can that be, Bruno? Who the hell's training you if they've never heard any of these ideas themselves? It's extraordinary.
Finland.
Oh, I know where you are. I know.
But I'm saying that, yeah, and yeah.
Okay, hold on, Bruno. That is unbelievable. All of us in North America and the UK, all of us in the Western world, we hold Finland as the pinnacle of education. It's like Finland, let's send more people to Finland and figure out what they're doing right. And I would say that what you do right in Finland is the best version of the current system that we've got.
So then there should be a discussion on
education.
But,
still not all the way there.
But yeah, but that's exactly the thing. In here, there is nothing related to what we are talking. And what we are striving for, I feel that's not a pinnacle in the Finnish education. So it's really a weird situation. So yeah.
Yeah. And what I would like to add, Bruno, is like what made you kind of come to this conference, and what, if you're in the system and you haven't heard too much about all these different alternative ideas over 5 years, kind of like, how can we get more people like you to come?
Well, that's exactly the thing, because me finding all these things have been my personal journey on trying to find alternatives to a system that has been told that it's the best of the world, and I've been seeing the flaws, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, but Bruno, do you speak Swedish or Finnish or both?
A bit of Finnish. And
okay. Well, I work with the Swedish-speaking school organization in Finland, who created some model democratic schools and wrote a report. They worked on 8 high schools and elementary schools in Helsinki.
Yeah.
And they wrote a report, and the report was written by a 19-year-old. It's called Demokrati I skolan. And I can send you the link. It's a very radical document, and it actually came from the students. So I don't think everything's quite so negative in Finland as you're finding.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying that it's negative. I'm just saying that in the teacher training, I'm missing all these type of ideas. So connected to what Heather was saying of giving this to future educators, I think that would be important to open people's minds. So,
well, that's a big part of the problem, is that the graduate schools of education are not leading in this direction, and there's so much that goes against their whole grain of purpose in life, I'm saying.
Okay.
I just wanted to say, hi, really great discussions. I am in Germany, and actually young teachers in Germany, when they go to their teacher training, are told, don't try to do anything different. You'll get a burnout in your first 3 years and you will be out. Just do everything the classical way. This is what is being recommended and taught right now in Germany.
Wow. That's like, it kind of makes sense in some ways why they're saying that to people, but in real life, I feel like there's still a lot of teacher burnout in most places doing it the traditional way. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, currently, I think statistics say that 1/3 of teachers in Germany are in burnout, 1/3 are overload. So it's really a lot.
Yeah, it sounds like it would be. Yeah, go ahead.
Back in Romania, where I studied, it was even worse. The most textbooks I had to read were about instruction. So not even real teaching, but I at some point I just refused to take the exams because I said I don't want to like go up and be an even better teacher because I don't want to read those books.
Really exactly, right?
Bad.
And I bet the majority of the students you're teaching would agree that they don't want to just read a bunch of textbooks, or some people may, but most people, like, that's not their ideal way of learning either. So, but it's exciting to see so many teachers like you here today, and like, because I just those kind of like little seeds, right? Kind of planted all around, and we're all kind of growing together. It's exciting.
I wonder if there'll be time at the end to talk about maybe ways that we can get teachers on board, because as a teacher that was new to a school, a Montessori school, I had tried multiple times to end homework, to end some of the policies that I felt were harmful to students. And I was met with major resistance from the teachers in my team. So I feel like, and now everybody's burned out with teaching online because that was insane. So I know the feeling, but I just wonder how we can, like, I don't know if it was Andrea, I don't know if I pronounced your name right, like, to get the spark that we need in teachers, because I feel like there's got to be something out there that will inspire them to say, like, this is enough, like, we got to do something about this.
Yeah. And I think that there's some teachers that are already out there, but they're kind of scared to come forward because they don't know if they'll be supported, because some schools are not supportive of it. Like, I've experienced some people in power not into it at all. So I think it's exciting again that there are some people, and hopefully we can support them to come forward, right?
Heather, in answer to your question, tomorrow's sessions are really conversations. So certainly, I think that the session that I'm involved with, or that I'm hosting, is in the afternoon tomorrow. And that's really what we're going to be talking about. How do we put this idea of unschooling school into action? How do we help teachers support it? How do we help parents? How do we help students do that? So yeah, hopefully you'll be able to come tomorrow and we'll try to problem solve some of these things.
Exactly. And one thing, I don't want to go too much over time over our break, but my mom just reminded me of is that kind of like we've seen evidence of how kids learn, and it's like not really the way the school teaches currently. So even if like people in power, like politicians and people that, you know, could have the political will to do it, if they can help show some support for it, that would kind of be exciting, because evidence-based learning, like a lot of us agree that we like, you know, evidence and doing things that prove that they're going to work. So I think it's exciting to know that it's proven that self-directed education kind of creates more kind of responsible and well-rounded individuals.
And what influences politicians are people.
Yeah.
We elect them. You know, things change because people get together. I mean, the Black Lives Matter movement did not come from politicians. The Me Too movement did not come from politicians. These are people that got together and said enough is enough, and their voice was loud enough that politicians then listened.
Exactly.